The world had a certain hum to it back then, a low-frequency thrum of suburban comfort that I mistook for happiness, a soundscape woven from the gentle click of the dishwasher finishing its cycle deep in the night, and the rhythmic swish-swish of the sprinkler system kicking on at dawn, casting fleeting rainbows in the early morning light. I remember the specific weight of the silence in our house after the kids were in bed, a silence that felt earned, paid for. The smell of our kitchen in the mornings was a complex blend I can still recall with painful clarity. Freshly ground coffee, the faint, clean scent of the expensive stone cleaner my wife insisted on for the marble countertops we'd agonized over for weeks, and the sweet aroma of toasted cinnamon raisin bread. We weren't extravagantly wealthy, not in the way you see in magazines, but we were comfortable, a word that now feels like a betrayal, a soft, woolen blanket pulled over my eyes. Comfort was the gilded cage I didn't know I was in, its bars polished to a high shine by a steady, demanding job. I held a senior position in a logistics firm, a title that came with a respectable salary and the unspoken expectation that my soul belonged to the company in 80-hour increments. My income was a predictable, reassuring figure on a monthly statement, but it felt like I was perpetually running on a treadmill in a windowless room, the scenery of my life blurring into a monotonous loop of quarterly reports, performance reviews, and conference calls with people in different time zones. I'd come home long after the kids were asleep, the headlights of my car sweeping across the living room window, my body aching with a fatigue that was more than physical. It was a deep, cellular exhaustion. I would find my wife on the sofa, a book resting unread on her chest, her face illuminated by the cold blue light of her phone as she scrolled through other people's curated lives. We'd talk, but our conversations had become logistical briefings. Who was taking our son to soccer practice? Who was picking up our daughter from ballet? What needed fixing in the house? The ever-present, unspoken pressure of the mortgage hanging in the air between us like fine dust. We were an efficient team managing a small, domestic enterprise, but the intimacy, the spark that had once defined us, had been relegated to the footnotes of our life's balance sheet, a forgotten asset. The desire for something more, for a way out of this relentless grind, was a constant, low-grade fever in the back of my mind. I dreamed of passive income, a magical phrase that whispered of freedom, of time, of being truly present for my own life instead of just scheduling it. I wanted to be the father who was actually watching the school play, not the one in the back row trying to answer urgent emails on his phone without the teacher noticing. That's when I met him. It wasn't in some high-pressure sales seminar in a sterile hotel ballroom or a slick city office with panoramic views. It was at a neighborhood barbecue, the late summer air thick with the smell of charcoal, citronella, and freshly cut grass. He was the cousin of a friend, introduced to me with a casual, almost offhand, "He's the guy who figured it out." He had a relaxed, easy confidence that I found myself instantly envying. He wasn't flashy. He wore a simple, Union linen shirt and worn leather sandals, but he carried himself with the unburdened air of a man who didn't have to check his bank account before ordering the expensive bottle of wine. We got to talking over paper plates piled high with potato salad and slightly burnt burgers. I found myself opening up, telling him about my job, the crushing hours, the feeling of being a well-compensated cog in a massive, indifferent machine. He just nodded, a knowing, sympathetic smile playing on his lips, as if he'd heard this story 100 times. He then shared his own journey, a remarkably similar tale of corporate burnout followed by what he called a paradigm shift. He used phrases that were new to me, phrases like alternative asset allocation and decentralized private equity. It all sounded incredibly complex, sophisticated, and exclusive. He wasn't selling anything, not directly. That was his genius. He was just sharing his story, the story of how he'd built a life where his money worked for him, tirelessly, around the clock, while he slept and spent time with his family. The investment he described was an invitation-only fund, a private circle that dealt in pre-development land acquisitions and providing bridge loans for tech startups on the cusp of a breakthrough. It was, he explained with a casual wave of his hand, completely insulated from the dizzying volatility of the public stock market, a sphere of finance for people who were truly in the know. The returns he mentioned were staggering, not in a wild, unbelievable lottery winner way, but in a steady, reliable, life-changing way. 15–20% year-on-year like clockwork. I went home that night with his business card in my pocket, the smooth, heavy cardstock feeling like a key to a secret door. I mentioned it to my wife as we were getting ready for bed. She was skeptical, her innate pragmatism a familiar and until then welcome anchor. She asked the right questions, the hard questions, the ones I didn't want to think about. Who were these people? Was it insured? What was the real risk? Where was their office? I brushed her concerns aside with a surge of confident condescension I now deeply regret. I told her this was different. This wasn't some flimsy.com stock. This was our chance to get ahead, to finally stop worrying about college funds and retirement. I did my research, which in retrospect consisted of spending an hour on a professionally designed website filled with stock photos of smiling families on sailboats and soaring eagles over mountain ranges. I read the glossy, jargon-filled prospectus he sent over, a document designed to impress and obfuscate in equal measure. It spoke of rigorous risk management, proprietary algorithms, and a diversified portfolio of high-yield, low-exposure assets. It all looked so legitimate, so solid, so reassuring. We had a small portfolio of stocks and a few mutual funds that plodded along, growing at a respectable but unexciting pace. This felt like stepping out of the slow lane and onto a bullet train. We decided to start small, a test, I called it. A sum that felt significant enough to matter, but not so large that it would devastate us if it went wrong. The process was almost disturbingly smooth. The paperwork was minimal, handled through a secure online portal. The advisor was always available to answer my calls, his voice a steady, reassuring presence. And then, at the end of the first quarter, the statement arrived in my inbox. The return was exactly what he had promised. Clean, beautiful number sitting there, representing a profit that would have taken my other investments a full year to generate. It felt like magic. It felt like I had discovered a secret cheat code for life, a hidden lever that made the world work in my favor. The small knot of anxiety in my stomach, the one my wife's caution had tied, began to loosen. I had been right. I was smart. I had found the way out. That first taste of success was the most dangerous, most addictive drug I've ever known. It silenced every one of my doubts and amplified my ambition into a deafening roar that completely drowned out the quiet, whispering voice of reason. The comfortable hum of our life started to sound different, no longer a sound of contentment, but the dull drone of stagnation. The intoxication of that initial success permeated every corner of our lives, changing the very color of the world around me. I started seeing everything through the lens of our new potential. That number on the first quarterly statement wasn't just money. It was a tangible, shimmering piece of a future I had only dared to imagine in fleeting daydreams. It was a down payment on a lake house with a long wooden dock. It was the 4 years of tuition for an Ivy League university. It was the freedom to finally quit my soul-crushing job and write a novel, a silly, romantic dream I hadn't spoken of in years. My conversations with the advisor, the charismatic man from the barbecue, became more frequent, evolving from cautious inquiries to collegial chats. He was a master of his craft, always available, always calm, his voice a reassuring balm on my lingering anxieties. He never pressured me, never pushed for more. Instead, he'd talk about the other clients, their successes, the exciting new projects the fund was backing, a boutique eco-hotel in a burgeoning tourist destination in Central America, a promising biotech startup that was on the verge of a major breakthrough in regenerative medicine. He made me feel like I was part of an exclusive club, a small circle of savvy, forward-thinking investors who were quietly and intelligently building real, lasting wealth while the rest of the world was stuck in the slow lane. The temptation to go bigger, to truly commit, was immense and all-consuming. I started crunching the numbers obsessively, sketching out complex scenarios on a legal pad late at night while my wife and kids slept, the only light in the house coming from the small lamp on my desk. If our initial, cautious investment could generate this much, what could a truly significant sum do? It could accelerate everything. It could buy us back years, decades of our lives. The idea took root in my mind and grew with the ferocity of a weed, choking out all other thoughts until it blossomed into a conviction that felt less like a choice and more like our destiny. The conversation with my wife was one of the hardest and most consequential I've ever had. We sat at the same kitchen table where we managed our mundane household budget, the cool marble now feeling like an operating table where I was about to perform a risky, life-altering surgery on our collective future. I laid out my plan with charts and projections I had printed out to liquidate a substantial portion of our traditional investments, the slow and steady retirement funds that were the bedrock of our financial security, and even to take out a home equity line of credit to maximize our position in his exclusive fund. I saw the fear in her eyes. It wasn't the explosive anger I had braced myself for, but a deep, quiet terror that was far more unsettling. She spoke in a low, trembling voice of the risks, of the old adage about not putting all our eggs in one basket. She reminded me that we had a good life, that we had enough, that this felt like a gamble. But her words felt like they were coming from our old life, the life of the treadmill, the life of quiet desperation and managed expectations. I had tasted something different, a world of possibility, and I wouldn't go back. I used all my powers of persuasion, every ounce of the trust I had built with her over the years, framing it not as a gamble but as a strategic move, a calculated decision for our family's ultimate security and freedom. I called it our one big shot. Reluctantly, her eyes filled with tears, she agreed. Her trust in me at that moment was a physical weight, a heavy mantle on my shoulders, and in my towering hubris, I was absolutely certain I could carry it without stumbling. The process of moving the money was surreal, a series of detached, administrative tasks that belied the enormity of what we were doing. Cashing out stock portfolios that we had nurtured for over a decade, signing the thick stack of papers for the line of credit at the local bank. It felt both momentous and terrifyingly simple. With a few clicks of a mouse and a few signatures, 15 years of careful saving and slow, patient growth were consolidated into a single wire transfer. I watched the confirmation screen on my laptop, the number so large it seemed abstract and unreal, and felt a powerful surge of adrenaline, a dizzying cocktail of sheer terror and exhilarating hope. For a time, my audacious gamble seemed to have paid off more spectacularly than I had even dared to dream. The online portal, our sleek, sophisticated window into this new world of wealth, showed our investment blossoming. The numbers climbed at a steady, dizzying rate. We were making more in a single quarter than I used to make in an entire year at my demanding job. The feeling was indescribable. I felt vindicated, prophetic, a financial genius who had outsmarted the market. The quiet tension that had been a constant undercurrent in our home dissolved, replaced by a giddy, shared excitement. We even made a small withdrawal, a few $1,000s, just to prove to ourselves that the money was real, and the funds appeared in our checking account within 3 business days. That sealed it. All remaining doubt evaporated. We bought a new car, not a flashy sports car, but a top-of-the-line family SUV, the kind with heated seats in the back and a panoramic sunroof, a vehicle that smelled of rich leather and success. We took a spontaneous 2-week trip to a tropical island, staying in an overwater bungalow at a resort we could never have afforded before. I remember sitting on our private balcony, watching the impossibly turquoise water, a ridiculously expensive cocktail in my hand, and feeling a profound, unshakable sense of accomplishment. I had done it. I had beaten the system. I had secured our family's future. My wife seemed to believe it too. Her fear was replaced by a hesitant but growing optimism. She started looking at brochures for exclusive private schools. We began driving through the wealthiest neighborhoods in our city on Sunday afternoons, just for fun, looking at grand houses with sprawling lawns and 3-car garages. The dream was no longer an abstract fantasy. It was becoming a concrete, achievable plan. I willfully ignored the small inconsistencies, the little red flags that my subconscious tried desperately to wave. When I asked for a more detailed breakdown of the fund's specific holdings, the advisor was masterfully evasive, citing proprietary information and strict confidentiality agreements with his partners. When I asked about their auditing firm, he gave me the name of a company I'd never heard of, one with a flimsy, generic website and no discernible history. But the numbers on the screen were so compelling, so incredibly seductive, that they shouted down my every doubt. He was a virtuoso at managing my perception, always ready with a plausible, jargon-laden explanation, always able to pivot the conversation back to the incredible, undeniable returns. I was so intensely focused on the destination, financial freedom, that I stopped paying any attention to the road I was on, ignoring the clear warning signs, the sharp, unannounced turns, and the crumbling edge of the cliff just beyond the guardrail. The first sign that something was profoundly wrong was almost imperceptible, as subtle and quiet as a single pane of glass cracking in a skyscraper miles away. The quarterly statement, which had always arrived in my inbox on the first of the month with the unerring precision of a Swiss watch, was a day late. I told myself it was nothing, a weekend delay, a minor technical glitch in their system. But a small, cold seed of dread was planted in the pit of my stomach, a feeling I hadn't experienced since before our investment had started paying off. I found myself refreshing my email obsessively, the familiar Pavlovian chime for a new message sending a jolt through my nervous system. I logged into the portal. The numbers were still there, glowing and beautiful and impossibly large, but for the first time they felt static, like a screenshot instead of a live account. When the statement finally arrived 3 days later, it came with a breezy, almost overly casual, apologetic note from my advisor about a system migration to a new, more secure server that had caused a backlog. I wanted to believe him. I needed to believe him with every fiber of my being because the alternative was unthinkable. A week later, my gnawing anxiety getting the better of me, I decided to initiate another small withdrawal. It wasn't that we needed the money, it was a test of the system, a private fire drill, a way to reassure myself that the crack was just a product of my own imagination. I put in the request through the portal, following the same simple steps I had before. The confirmation email arrived instantly, as always, but the money did not. After 3 business days, the usual transfer time, our bank account remained stubbornly unchanged. My calls to the advisor, which he had always answered by the second ring, now went straight to his polished, professional voicemail. My first few messages were casual, just a friendly check-in, the audio equivalent of a relaxed smile. By the end of the week, my voice was strained, the panic barely concealed beneath a thin veneer of politeness. He finally replied, not with a call, but with a terse text message, blaming a new, complicated international banking regulation that was causing unforeseen wire transfer delays across the board. It was just plausible enough to keep me from spiraling into full-blown panic, but the seed of dread was beginning to sprout, sending icy tendrils up my spine. That's when I started to dig. Not the superficial, ego-driven research I had done before, but a frantic, desperate, sweat-soaked excavation into the dark corners of the internet. I spent entire nights online, my eyes burning from the screen's glare, falling down rabbit holes of obscure financial forums and investor watchdog sites. I searched for the name of the fund, the advisor, the parent company he claimed to represent. At first, I found nothing but their own slick marketing materials, which was unsettling in itself for a firm supposedly managing hundreds of millions of dollars. Then, buried deep on the 7th page of search results, in a forum thread from 3 years prior, I found it. A single post from a user with a story that was so chillingly, precisely similar to mine that I felt the air leave my lungs. An exclusive, invitation-only fund, incredible and consistent returns, an advisor who was always available, until one day he wasn't. The thread was a ghost town, the original poster long inactive, their profile a digital tombstone. But it was enough. The crack had splintered, and the entire magnificent facade of my new life was beginning to groan under the immense pressure of the truth. I hired a private investigator, a gruff, cynical man who was a former financial crimes detective. He listened to my story in his cluttered office, which smelled of stale coffee and regret, with a weary, unsurprised expression on his face. He'd seen a dozen versions of me before. He took my money and my meticulously organized binder of documents and told me not to get my hopes up. The true unraveling, when it came, happened not with a dramatic bang, but with a series of quiet, devastating clicks of a mouse. The investment company's website, once a slick, interactive beacon of my financial future, was suddenly gone, replaced by a generic, mocking 404 not found error. The sleek online portal where I had spent countless hours watching my phantom wealth grow was inaccessible, the login page a dead end. The advisor's phone number, when I tried it one last time, gave me a flat, robotic message. The number you have dialed has been disconnected. It was over, all of it. The finality was absolute. A heavy steel door slammed shut and locked from the other side, leaving me in the dark. I remember sitting in my home office, the same room where I had dreamed and planned our glorious, liberated future, and feeling nothing but a vast, hollow, echoing emptiness. The numbers on my spreadsheets, the detailed projections of our future wealth, were just meaningless, mocking symbols on a screen. The money was gone, every single penny. The savings we had carefully built over 15 years of hard work and sacrifice, the equity we had pulled from the very walls of our home, it had all vanished into the digital ether, stolen by a charming, confident man I'd met over a plate of potato salad at a summer barbecue. The hardest moment of my entire life, harder than any professional failure or personal loss I had ever experienced, was walking down the stairs to tell my wife. She was in the kitchen, humming along to the radio, packing the kids' lunches for the next day, a scene of such profound domestic normality that it felt like a physical blow. She saw the look on my face and her smile faltered, her hands freezing over an open lunchbox. I didn't have to say much. The truth was written all over my face, a language of ruin she understood instantly. I watched the color drain from her cheeks, her hand coming up to her mouth as she sank into a kitchen chair as if her legs had given out. There were no recriminations, no angry shouts, no "I told you so." There was only a silence so profound and heavy it felt like the air had been sucked out of the room, a vacuum where our future used to be. In that crushing silence, I heard the sound of our life breaking apart. The debt we were in was astronomical, a mountain that seemed impossible to climb. The line of credit was due, the mortgage was now impossibly, suffocatingly high. The calls from the bank started within weeks. The letters, first polite, computer-generated reminders, and then increasingly urgent, red-stamped demands filled our mailbox, each one a fresh wave of nausea. The comfortable hum of our life was replaced by the high-pitched, incessant scream of financial ruin. We were bankrupt. The word itself felt like a physical illness, a vicious cancer that had been growing inside our lives undetected and was now suddenly terminal. The shame was a constant companion, a heavy, suffocating coat I couldn't take off, even when I was alone. I had not just lost our money, I had willfully, arrogantly betrayed my family's trust, gambling with our collective security and losing in the most spectacular, catastrophic way imaginable. Hitting the bottom is not a singular, dramatic event like in the movies. It's a long, grinding, soul-crushing descent, a slow-motion fall down an impossibly long flight of stairs. The first casualty was the house, our beautiful home filled with the ghosts of birthday parties and quiet Sunday mornings. The for sale sign hammered into our perfect lawn felt like a public declaration of my incompetence, a bright red beacon of my failure for all our friends and neighbors to see. Strangers walked through our rooms, opening our closets, judging our furniture, their murmurs and whispers echoing in the suddenly cavernous spaces, while we politely answered questions and tried to pretend we were simply downsizing for a simpler life. The closing day was a surreal blur of sterile law offices and endless stacks of paperwork, the act of signing away the deed to the only real home our children had ever known feeling like an amputation. We sold the new SUV for a fraction of what we had paid for it, the lingering smell of rich leather a mocking reminder of our brief, illusory wealth. We moved into a small, two-bedroom apartment on the other side of town, in a sprawling, anonymous complex with thin walls and perpetually overflowing dumpsters. The sensory landscape of my life changed overnight. The gentle hum of the suburbs was replaced by the constant, jarring noise of sirens in the distance, of our upstairs neighbors arguing at all hours, of car alarms blaring at 3 a.m. instead of the clean scent of cut grass and blooming hydrangeas. The air was thick with the greasy smell of the fast food chicken place downstairs and the acrid tang of exhaust fumes from the busy road. I took a job at a small shipping company, working in a dusty, poorly lit warehouse, managing inventory on a clipboard. The pay was a humiliating fraction of my old income, and the work was mind-numbing and physically demanding, but it was a paycheck. It was a start. The physical labor was, in a strange way, almost a relief, a way to exhaust my body to the point where my mind wouldn't have the energy to dwell on the bottomless pit of what I had done. But the shame was relentless, a constant companion. Every time I swiped our debit card at the discount grocery store, praying silently that it wouldn't be declined, I felt its hot sting. Every time I had to tell my kids we couldn't afford something as simple as a new video game or a trip to the cinema, I felt like a complete failure as a father. The strain on my marriage was immense, a chasm that grew wider with each passing day. My wife found work as a receptionist at a dental clinic, a job that required her to be pleasant and smiling all day while inside she was crumbling. We barely saw each other, two exhausted ships passing in the cramped hallway of our new life, too burdened by our own private grief and exhaustion to connect. She never blamed me out loud, but a thick, impenetrable wall of unspoken resentment stood between us. The easy intimacy we once shared was gone, replaced by a fragile, pained politeness that was somehow worse than open anger. We slept with a foot of cold, empty space between us in a bed that felt both too small and too vast. There were nights I was sure she would leave, that she would pack a bag, take the children, and go back to her parents' house. I wouldn't have blamed her. I thought I had lost everything when the money vanished, but I was wrong. The true bottom was the cold, paralyzing fear that I was about to lose them, too. The turning point wasn't a dramatic revelation or a single cathartic event. It was a Tuesday night. I came home late from the warehouse, my muscles aching, my spirit at its lowest possible ebb. I walked in to find my wife and our two kids sitting on the floor of our tiny, cluttered living room, having built an elaborate fort out of cardboard boxes from our move and every blanket we owned. They were laughing, a genuine, unburdened sound I hadn't truly heard in months. My son was wearing a spaghetti pot on his head as a helmet. My daughter had drawn a family crest on a piece of cardboard with a crayon. My wife looked up at me as I stood in the doorway, and for the first time in what felt like a lifetime, she smiled at me. A real, genuine smile that reached her tired eyes. She gestured for me to join them. I crawled into their makeshift castle, the cheap, rough carpet scratching my hands, and for a few hours we weren't a family in crisis on the brink of collapse. We were just a family in a fort, telling silly stories in the warm, enclosed darkness. It was a small, insignificant moment in the grand scheme of things, but it was everything. It was the first stone laid in the foundation of our reconstruction. We started talking again, really talking, late at night after the kids were asleep. Not about the debt or the budget, but about our fears, our disappointments, our grief. I apologized not just once but over and over, a raw and honest admission of my arrogance and folly, until I felt she truly heard the depth of my regret. Slowly, painstakingly, we began to tear down the wall between us, brick by painful brick. We learned to live with less, and in doing so we discovered the simple, quiet joy of a long walk in the park, of a movie night at home with DVDs borrowed from the public library, of a home-cooked meal that didn't come from a box. My children, resilient in a way adults can never truly be, adapted. They didn't miss the big house or the fancy car. They just wanted us, their parents, present and accounted for. I finally learned the profound difference between wealth and richness. I had chased a phantom, an abstract number on a screen, a foolish proxy for happiness, and in doing so I had nearly lost the tangible, priceless assets I already owned. The obsessive pursuit of passive income had cost me my peace of mind and made me an active, willing participant in my own ruin. We still struggle. The debt follows us like a long shadow. The future is a fog, not the clear, sunlit path I once so arrogantly envisioned. But we are a family. We are a team. My wife's hand finds mine in the dark now. The apartment is small, but it's filled with a genuine warmth and a messy, vibrant life our big, quiet house never had. I lost a fortune, an amount of money that still makes me sick to my stomach when I think about it, but in the wreckage I found my life. It's a bittersweet kind of peace, a quiet contentment forged in the humbling fires of a catastrophic failure. I survived, and I learned that sometimes the only way to find out what you truly have is to lose everything you thought you wanted. Thanks listening this story. Now I want to hear your thoughts in the comments. Let's see how global our community is. Comment your country down below. Share this story to your friends and leave a like and subscribe for more episodes like this.